After my open-heart surgery, my daughter-in-law leaned over and whispered to my son, "Leave him here. He's no longer our problem." They walked out without looking back. I slowly nodded from the hospital bed. Downstairs, my attorney waited with one devastating document. Their faces went white. Before continuing, subscribe to our new channel, where we tell stories about men who take revenge on their insolent children, sons-in-law, and daughters-in-law. My name is Raymond Fletcher. I'm 70 years old, and I live in Belle Meade, just outside Nashville, Tennessee. Spent 38 years as a licensed commercial real estate appraiser, walked through warehouses, strip malls, office towers, residential estates, put a number on everything I touched. Retired 6 years ago and don't miss the paperwork one bit. What I do miss is the clarity of it. You look at a property, you factor in every variable, and you arrive at the truth. No emotion, just facts. Turns out that skill doesn't leave you when you hang up your briefcase. You just start applying it to other things, other people. I should have applied it sooner. My house sits on 2,847 Maple Creek Drive. 4 bedrooms, 2-car garage, mature oaks out front that I planted myself 32 years ago. Belle Meade is old Nashville money. Quiet streets, neighbors who wave but don't pry. It's the kind of neighborhood where a well-kept property says everything about the man who owns it. I kept mine well. I still do. The garage is my kingdom. Right now, I'm about 14 months into restoring a 1968 Ford Mustang that I picked up for $6,200 from an estate sale in Murfreesboro. Needs a full engine rebuild, new interior, rust treatment on the rear quarter panels. Some people do crossword puzzles. I do this. 3 years ago, my son Terry called me on a Sunday evening. He was 35 at the time, his wife, Nicole, 32. They'd been married 4 years. I liked the early version of that marriage, or at least I thought I did. Terry said they were having a rough patch financially and asked if they could stay with me just for a few months, Dad, while we sort things out. I said yes. That's what fathers do. I want to be precise about Terry because precision matters. He's not stupid. He's charming in the way certain salespeople are charming. Warm handshake, good eye contact, laugh that arrives right on cue. When he was 12, he talked a hardware store owner into a discount on a bike chain by explaining with complete sincerity that the discount would make the man feel great about himself. The owner laughed and gave it to him. Terry has always understood that people want to feel good. He exploits that understanding quietly and consistently. What Terry doesn't have is backbone. Never did. As a kid, if something went wrong, there was always a reason that wasn't his fault. He's built an entire adult life on that architecture. I watched it happen and told myself it was a phase. Nicole is different. I don't say that as a compliment. She is 35 now, the kind of woman who researches the exits before she enters a room. Slim, well-dressed, hair always done. She speaks in a particular register, warm on the surface, precise underneath. When she says, "of course," she means, "I've already decided." When she says, "that's interesting," she means, "you're wrong, and I'm cataloging it." I noticed this within the first 2 weeks of living together. I filed it away. The first year wasn't unbearable. Terry helped with yard work twice in the spring. Nicole cooked on Sundays occasionally. There was a version of this that could have been fine. Adult families sharing a home, navigating the awkwardness with decent grace. But fine isn't what Nicole came for. The shift was gradual, the way water damage is gradual. You don't see the rot until you pull back the drywall. It started with small things. A comment here, a glance there. I began noticing how Nicole's eyes moved around the house when she thought I wasn't looking. Not the eyes of someone grateful to be living somewhere, but the eyes of someone calculating square footage. She started having phone conversations in the kitchen that went quiet when I walked in. Terry began referring to the guest bedroom as our room, and then by winter, simply as the room, as though it had always been theirs. The dinner about 8 months into their stay was the first moment the mask genuinely slipped. We were eating pot roast. I'd made it, because I cook in this house and always have. Nicole was talking to Terry about a neighborhood in East Nashville where a couple they knew had just bought a place. She mentioned the price, mentioned how the market was moving, mentioned square footage and comparable sales, standard dinner conversation for people in their 30s. But then she said, with the casualness of someone who'd rehearsed it, "Properties around here are going for close to $900,000 now. The comps on Maple Creek Drive especially. It's remarkable what this area has done." She wasn't looking at Terry when she said it. She was looking at me. I didn't respond. I reached for the bread, tore off a piece, and made a mental note. That's another thing 38 years in appraisal teaches you. When someone is telling you what they think something is worth, They're usually telling you what they want from it. I finished my dinner. I did the dishes. I went to the garage and spent an hour on the Mustang's rear differential. The following Wednesday morning, I walked into my home office to pull out a folder I needed. Quarterly investment summary. Nothing dramatic. And I stopped in the doorway. I know that office. I know it the way I know the engine bay of that Mustang. Every part, every position, every detail. The manila folders in the second drawer of my filing cabinet had been moved. Not missing. Not disturbed in any obvious way. Just slightly out of order. Enough that someone else wouldn't notice. Enough that I did. I stood there for a moment, one hand on the doorframe, and looked at my filing cabinet across the room. Then I walked to my workbench in the garage, sat down on my stool, and thought about what exactly I was dealing with. The oak trees in the front yard were just starting to bud. Spring was a week away, maybe less. I made myself a cup of coffee and I thought for a long time. There's a particular kind of clarity that comes when you stop arguing with what you're seeing. I'd been doing that for months, filing things away, noting inconsistencies, making excuses for both of them the way you do with family, because the alternative is too uncomfortable. But standing in the doorway of my office that morning, looking at those slightly rearranged folders, I stopped arguing. I went to the hardware store that afternoon and bought a small wireless security camera, the kind that looks like a smoke detector. $53. I mounted it in the upper corner of my office bookshelf, angled toward the filing cabinet, connected it to my phone. In Tennessee, a property owner can record video in their own home without notifying occupants. I knew that before I bought the camera. 3 days passed. I went about my routine. Garage in the mornings, errands, the long walk down Maple Creek Drive every afternoon around 4. I didn't check the footage until the evening of the third day. I sat in my truck in the driveway, phone in hand, and watched. Nicole entered the office at 11:14 in the morning, 2 days after I'd installed the camera. She was unhurried. She went directly to the filing cabinet and worked through the folders with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. She photographed 7 documents on her phone. I watched her do it. Focused, calm, utterly without hesitation. She wasn't browsing. She knew what she was looking for. I recognized 2 documents from the angle of the footage, my will and a quarterly brokerage statement. I sat in the truck for a moment after the video ended. That evening, I heard Terry on the phone in the hallway outside their room. The door was open a crack. I wasn't trying to listen. I was coming up the stairs. But I heard him say clearly, "He's not going anywhere. Year, maybe 2 at the outside. We just have to be patient." He laughed at something the other person said. Then the door closed. A year, maybe 2. I turned that sentence over in my mind, thought about how a man talks about his father that way. Not worried, not sad, just scheduling. Like a flight he was waiting to catch. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen sink, looking out at the backyard. I thought about Terry at 9 years old, the summer I taught him to ride a bike in that same driveway. He fell 4 times and got up each time without crying. Skinned both knees on the third fall, looked at them for a second, then got back on. I remember thinking, that kid has real grit. I remember being proud. It's a strange thing to remember a version of your child that no longer exists. I thought about Nicole at their wedding. I had paid for a significant portion of it, the venue, the catering, the flowers she'd requested and changed twice. I sat in the front row and watched my son marry a woman I didn't fully know yet, thinking the important thing was that he seemed happy. She'd smiled at me in the receiving line. Real enough, I thought then. I was more naive about that difference than I am now. The document I found the following morning ended the last of my doubt. I'd been going through my filing cabinet, reorganizing now that I knew someone else had been through it, and found a folded paper tucked behind the last hanging folder in the bottom drawer. It hadn't been there before. I would stake my professional reputation on that. I opened it. It was a draft. Incomplete. No signatures, no notarization, but clearly a template for a durable power of attorney, with my name typed in the principal line and a blank in the agent line. Someone had printed it from a legal form website. It was the kind of document that, once signed, gives the named agent full authority over financial and medical decisions. My name was already on it. The agent line was blank, waiting. I folded it back up and put it in my jacket pocket. I didn't say anything to either of them that evening. I sat at the dinner table and asked Terry about his week and listened and nodded at the right moments. Nicole offered to clear the dishes, and I said thank you. Everything was surface and nothing was real. That night, past midnight, I sat on the concrete floor of the garage beside the Mustang. The interior was stripped to bare metal. Seats out, dashboard removed, wiring harness laid out in organized bundles along the wall. I'd been working on it for over a year, and it looked, at that moment, like something that couldn't possibly come back together. I knew that was an illusion. I'd brought worse back from worse. I'm not a man who panics. 38 years with damaged property, distressed assets, buildings that looked worthless outside and had solid bones underneath. You learn to assess before you react. Walk every room, pull back the carpet, run the numbers twice. What I had, footage on my phone, a draft document in my pocket, and a clear picture of what was being planned. What I didn't have yet was a plan of my own. I looked up the Tennessee Bar Association the next morning and asked for a referral to an attorney specializing in estate planning, trusts, and real property. The woman gave me 3 names. I looked up all 3. One stood out, Harold Sims, 333 Commerce Street, 5th floor. 22 years in practice, rated AV preeminent by Martindale Hubble. No connection to me, no mutual acquaintances. Clean slate, exactly what I needed. I called at 9 in the morning. His assistant asked about the nature of the matter. I said, estate protection. Someone is attempting to take what I built, and I'd like to make that significantly harder for them. She put me on hold for 40 seconds, then came back with an appointment for the following Thursday at 10 o'clock. I wrote it in my calendar, closed the notebook, and went out to the garage. The Mustang wasn't going to restore itself. Neither was anything else. The drive downtown takes about 22 minutes from Belmead on a Thursday morning, assuming you take West End and avoid the construction on Charlotte. I left early, told no one where I was going, and parked in the garage on 4th Avenue 2 blocks from the address I'd written on a notepad the night before. 333 Commerce Street, 5th floor. Harold Sims occupied a corner suite that looked out over the Cumberland River. The office was the kind that signals competence without trying to impress. Good furniture, no clutter, diplomas on the wall but not arranged for display. His assistant, a composed woman in her 40s, offered me coffee and I accepted. I sat in a chair that faced his desk and waited 4 minutes before he walked in. He was tall, mid-50s, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the unhurried manner of someone who had heard a great many urgent stories and remained unshaken by all of them. He shook my hand, sat down, and said, "Mr. Fletcher, what can I do for you today?" I opened my briefcase and put 3 things on the desk in front of him. The printed screenshots from the camera footage. Nicole at the filing cabinet, clear as daylight. The photograph of the draft, durable power of attorney, with my name already typed in the principal line. And a USB drive containing the full camera footage, date stamped, plus the audio I'd managed to record of Terry's phone call, using the voice memo function on my own phone. I'd held it close to the wall that evening, not proud of it, but not sorry either. Harold put on his reading glasses and looked at each item without rushing. He watched the footage on his laptop with the sound low. He read the draft POA twice. He picked up the audio transcript I'd typed out, Terry's voice, word for word. He's not going anywhere. Year, maybe 2 at the outside. We just have to be patient. When he was done, he folded his hands on the desk. How long have they been living with you? 3 years in March. Any lease agreement, rent payments, written arrangement of any kind? Nothing in writing. Verbal only. Temporary, they said. He nodded slowly, the way men do when they're confirming something they already suspected. And the power of attorney draft. You found this in your own filing cabinet? Behind the last folder in the bottom drawer. It wasn't there before. He looked at me for a moment over his glasses. Mr. Fletcher, you did something right that most people in your position don't do. You documented before you acted. That matters. He paused. Now let's make sure the rest is done right as well. We talked for an hour and 40 minutes. I had expected a consultation. What I got was a strategy session. Harold walked me through 3 parallel tracks. First, establishing a revocable living trust that would place the house and my primary financial assets under structured protection, with beneficiary designations that had nothing to do with Terry or Nicole. Second, changing the named beneficiaries on my brokerage accounts, which held approximately $340,000 at current valuation, to a charitable organization of my choosing. Third, retaining a licensed private investigator to document any further attempts by either of them to access, photograph, or act on my financial documents or property. The trust is the foundation, Harold said, pulling a yellow legal pad toward him and writing as he spoke. Once it's properly executed and recorded, the house is no longer simply yours in the way they're thinking about it. It belongs to the trust. That changes the math considerably. They'll notice if I go to a notary. You won't need to. I have a notary on staff. You can execute the documents here. We record the signing on video, standard practice in contested estate matters. If anyone challenges your capacity later, the tape answers the question before a judge has to. I thought about that. Thought about how thoroughly he'd already anticipated the next move. Their move the one they'd try when they realized what was happening. He'd been 2 steps ahead before I even finished explaining the situation. I found that reassuring in the specific way that competence always is. I left the office at 12:40 with a handwritten action list on one sheet of paper and an appointment to return the following week to review the first draft of the trust documents. I drove back through downtown with the windows down. Nashville in early spring has a particular quality to it. The air is still cool but not cold. The dogwoods along the median just starting. When I got home, Nicole was in the kitchen making something that involved a considerable number of dishes. She looked up when I came in. "Where were you this morning?" I set my briefcase down by the door. "Went to look at a property." "Old habit." She smiled. That specific smile she uses when she's deciding whether to push further or file it away. She filed it away. "Dinner's around 7 if you're here." "I'll be in the garage," I said. She smiled again. I walked through to the garage and closed the door behind me, and I stood next to the Mustang in the quiet and thought about how people underestimate the advantage of being considered harmless. The next morning, a white utility van pulled up in front of the house at 9:15. Magnetic sign on the side. Precision Home Services, Nashville, Tennessee. The man who knocked on the door was somewhere around 40, medium build, carrying a clipboard and a toolbox. He introduced himself as Trevor and said there had been a report of a slow drain in the area, and the management company had asked him to do a courtesy check of properties on the street. Nicole answered the door. I watched from the hallway. She let him in without a second thought. Trevor Nelson was not a plumber. I want to be clear about that, though he was convincing enough that Nicole offered him a glass of water and walked him through to the downstairs bathroom without hesitation. People in Belle Meade are accustomed to service professionals in their homes. It doesn't register as unusual. That, Harold had explained, was precisely the point. I had found Nelson through a licensed investigation firm in Nashville. Not the first name in the search results, but the third, after checking the state licensing board's public records for complaints. He charged $85 an hour, plus documented expenses. I paid a $1,500 retainer by check. Everything on paper. His job for the first 2 weeks was observation and documentation. Nothing more. He wasn't to approach Terry or Nicole, wasn't to enter any room he wasn't invited into, wasn't to access anything he didn't have permission to access. He was there to watch, record what was visible in public or semi-public spaces, and report back to me. What he reported back was more than I'd expected. The loan, I'd nearly forgotten about it, which tells you something about how thoroughly I'd let things slide. 14 months before, Terry had come to me with what he described as an emergency. His car needed a new transmission and some additional work. Total estimate $4,200, and he was short that month. Could I help? I wrote him a check for $4,200 and told him to pay me back when he could. No rush. He thanked me warmly, which he does well. Nelson came back 3 weeks in with a manila envelope, printed records from public database searches, and photographs from public vantage points. The check I'd written for $4,200 had been deposited. That same week, Terry had transferred $14,200 from a joint account into a separate account. Total, $18,400 moved in 1 week. 2 weeks after that, both of them had flown to the Cayman Islands. Nelson pulled it from a booking confirmation Nicole had shared on private social media, obtained through a mutual acquaintance's screenshot. 7 nights. The receipts from the same trail added up to just over $11,000. The transmission that needed replacing had apparently been located in the Caribbean. I read through the envelope at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning while they were still sleeping. I drank my coffee and looked at the numbers. The $18,400 figure would matter later. I folded everything back into the envelope and put it in a lockbox under the workbench in the garage, combination known only to me. The second thing Nelson brought me was more serious. One of Nelson's standard procedures was checking public notary records, filings, appointment requests, anything in accessible county databases. He found a record of an appointment request at a notary office in Madison, made in Nicole's name, referencing a quitclaim deed transfer and requesting information on requirements for transferring residential property to a family member. The appointment had been made, then apparently canceled. The notary hadn't processed anything, but the inquiry was there, documented, dated. A quitclaim deed, for anyone unfamiliar, one of the simplest instruments for transferring property ownership. No warranty, no title search. You sign, notarize, record it with the county. If I had signed one, under any circumstances, the house could theoretically have changed hands before anyone looked twice. I took that document out of the envelope and held it for a long moment. Then I put it in the lockbox with everything else and went back inside to make breakfast. The cardiologist's appointment had been scheduled for a while, a follow-up on irregularities my primary care doctor had flagged. I went on a Tuesday and sat in a waiting room until they called my name. The cardiologist, Dr. Park, was direct and didn't waste words. She showed me the imaging, explained what she was seeing. One of my heart valves had developed a condition requiring surgical repair. Not an emergency. She used the word elective, meaning planned rather than optional. But it needed to happen within 6 to 8 weeks. I drove home on a different route, through the older part of Belmead. I thought about the timing. Surgery in 6 weeks meant everything needed to be in place before that date. Not after. Before. Over the following 5 weeks, I moved with a focus that surprised even Harold when I called with updates. I transferred $280,000 from my brokerage account into a new trust-designated account at a separate institution, titled in the name of the Raymond Fletcher Revocable Living Trust. Beneficiary designations on my remaining investment accounts, approximately $60,000, were changed to the Vanderbilt Health Foundation. I updated the payable on death designations on both checking accounts. Harold drafted the trust instrument, 18 pages, which I read in full and asked 7 questions about. 2 days before the surgery, I drove to Commerce Street for the 3rd time. Harold's notary, Patricia, set up a video camera on a tripod facing the conference table. Harold explained what documents were being signed. He asked whether I understood what I was signing, whether I was acting freely, whether anyone had pressured me. I answered each question clearly. I signed the amended and restated Revocable Living Trust at 10:47 in the morning. Patricia notarized it at 10:49. Harold told me a certified copy would be registered with Davidson County Register of Deeds, first thing the following morning. I thanked him, shook his hand, and walked back to the elevator. In the lobby, I checked my phone. A text from Terry. "Hey, Dad, you around tonight? Nicole made that pasta you like." I put the phone back in my pocket and walked out onto Commerce Street. The sun was high over the buildings. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, then turned toward the parking garage. The surgery was in 2 days. Everything that needed to be done was done. The surgery was scheduled for early morning. I drove myself to Vanderbilt University Medical Center before sunrise and checked in at the front desk with my insurance card and a small overnight bag. The admitting nurse asked if I had someone with me. I told her I had someone meeting me afterward. She wrote something in her notes and handed me a bracelet. The pre-op process takes longer than most people expect. There's a particular rhythm to it. Forms, vitals, more forms, a conversation with the anesthesiologist, a gown engineered specifically to make a person feel like they've misplaced their dignity. I had been through minor procedures before, nothing like this. This was different in scale, but not in how I approached it. By the time I was lying in the pre-op bay with an IV in my arm and a nurse marking my chest with a felt-tip pen, I was satisfied that nothing had been left undone. I had told Terry the evening before. Kept it simple. Surgery in the morning, cardiac valve, repair, routine. He said he'd come by. I didn't ask Nicole. I had stopped extending invitations she hadn't earned some months back. But I knew she'd come anyway. She wasn't the type to miss a moment that might require her presence for appearances. They put me under at 7:14. The last thing I remember clearly is the ceiling tiles above the operating table and the anesthesiologist's calm, professional voice counting down. I had no particular feelings about it. Everything that needed to be done had been done. The paperwork was filed, the account transfers complete, the trust registered. If something went wrong on that table, the structure would hold without me. That thought was more comforting than I expected. What was supposed to take 2 hours took 4. I learned this later. I wasn't tracking time from the inside. I came up from the anesthesia in stages, the way you surface from a deep pool. Sounds first, then light, then the specific weight of your own body pressing into a mattress. I was in the recovery unit, monitors beeping at steady intervals, an IV line in my left arm. The room was pale green and smelled of antiseptic and recycled air. I didn't try to move. I lay still and let my brain catch up. There's a particular flatness to the first hour after general anesthesia. A clean, undecorated awareness, no urgency, no emotional weather, just facts. I was alive. The operation was complete. The monitors were beeping in a rhythm that nobody had commented on with alarm. These were good facts. A nurse came in and checked my readings without waking me fully. I watched her through half-closed eyes. She made a note, adjusted something on the IV stand, and left quietly. The room settled back into its steady beeping. I don't know how much time passed before I heard them come in. I had my eyes mostly closed, not fully, just the particular slack stillness that people mistake for sleep. I'd done that before, in uncomfortable meetings over the years. You learn to listen without looking. The footsteps were Terry's first. I know his walk, the slight drag on the right foot he's had since a knee injury in his 20s. Then Nicole's heels on the linoleum, 2 sharp, precise clicks per step. They came to the side of the bed and stopped. Neither spoke for a moment. I could sense them assessing. Not the way you assess someone you love, but the way you assess a situation, looking for data, running calculations. I heard the monitor beep, heard the ambient noise of the unit outside the partially open door. Terry said low, "He looks rough." Nicole didn't respond to that. I heard her shift her weight. She would have noted the IV line, the monitoring leads, the pallor of someone who had just spent 4 hours under general anesthesia. She would have run those observations through her particular kind of arithmetic. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, the kind that carries a few feet and no further. She thought I was unconscious. She thought I was no threat, no witness, no one who could hear or remember anything. She had been thinking exactly that for 3 years. She said, "Leave him here. He's not our problem anymore." The words arrived with a particular clarity, not the words themselves exactly. I had expected something like this, in some form, eventually. What struck me was the tone. Not cruel, not even cold particularly, just practical. The voice of someone checking an item off a list. She said it the way you say we don't need this anymore before dropping something in a bin. Terry was quiet for a moment. Then I heard him move toward the door. He said something to the nurse outside. I caught the phrase, "Dad's in good hands." And then the footsteps moved away. 2 sets, down the hall, fading. I lay still for another minute after the sound disappeared. Then I opened my eyes and looked at the ceiling. I didn't have a particular emotional reaction. Not rage, not grief. What I had was a kind of absolute clarity, the feeling you get when a measurement comes in exactly where you expected it to. Everything I had built over the past several weeks, every document filed and dollar moved and decision made, had been made correctly. I knew that already, but this was the final confirmation, the last piece of information I needed, delivered to me without effort. I turned my head slowly. The room was quiet. On the nightstand, my phone sat face down where I'd left it before going into surgery. I reached for it. The movement cost me more than I expected. There's a particular quality of effort to raising your arm when your chest has been cut open, and the body is not shy about reminding you of this. I got the phone, turned it over. One new message, Harold Sims, time-stamped 40 minutes after I'd gone into surgery. Downstairs, waiting. I looked at those 2 words for a long moment. Then I set the phone on my chest and closed my eyes again. I pressed the call button for the nurse. Her name was Diane. I'd noted it on the badge when she first checked my vitals. She came in within 2 minutes, which I appreciated. I told her I needed help sitting up and accessing my phone. She adjusted the bed, checked my readings, and without being asked, wheeled a rolling tablet stand to my bedside so I could call the front desk. I said I was expecting a visitor, Harold Sims, and asked if she could let him know the room number. She nodded and went to the door. 40 minutes after Terry and Nicole had walked out of the building, Harold walked in. He was carrying a leather briefcase, the same one I'd seen him with in his Commerce Street office. He was dressed in his standard way, dark suit, no tie, reading glasses in his breast pocket. He looked at the monitors, then at me, with the measured expression of a man who has learned not to react to the unexpected appearance of his clients in hospital beds. "How do you feel?" he said. "Like someone opened my chest," I said. "Sit down." He pulled the chair from beside the window to the side of the bed and sat. He set the briefcase on his knees and opened it. From inside, he withdrew a single document, a bound sheaf of pages, tabbed with colored adhesive markers, neatly stapled. He set it on the bed beside my right hand. The cover page read, "Amended and restated revocable living, Trust of Raymond Fletcher. Executed the day before surgery. Notarized by Patricia. Witnessed and video recorded in Harold's conference room. Registered with Davidson County Register of Deeds that same morning at 9:14. I could see the stamp on the copy. Harold walked me through the key provisions, speaking quietly and without rush. The house at 2847 Maple Creek Drive, transferred to the trust, with a provision specifying its passage to the Nashville General Hospital. Foundation after Raymond Fletcher's death, or 60 days following a written request from Raymond Fletcher himself. The brokerage assets, already transferred and retitled. Beneficiary designations on both checking accounts, updated. Terry Fletcher, listed by full legal name, was not a named beneficiary anywhere in the document. Any claim by the spouse or lineal descendants of the grantor on trust assets was barred without a separate court proceeding. Harold said, The county recording is time-stamped. That matters if anyone tries to argue the timeline. I nodded. I understood what he meant. They would try to argue the timeline. We talked for about 20 minutes. Then Harold closed his briefcase, stood, and said he'd be in touch. He was almost at the door when I heard the footsteps. I recognized them before the door opened. Nicole came in first, moving quickly, the specific controlled speed of someone who needs to look casual, but isn't. She was carrying a small bag, which she held up slightly, as justification. I left my... She stopped. Harold was standing at the foot of my bed. The briefcase was in his hand. On the bed beside me, the document was still visible. Nicole's eyes moved from Harold to the document to me. The calculation happened quickly. I could see it, the way I used to see it when a client walked into a property and immediately started running numbers they hadn't yet said aloud. She was fast. I'll grant her that. Terry came in behind her. He looked at Harold with the polite confusion of someone who doesn't yet know what he's seeing. Then he looked at the document. His eyes moved to the Davidson County stamp on the cover page. Something shifted in his face. Not understanding exactly, but the beginning of it. The color left his cheeks in a way that was almost clinical to observe. Nicole's hand moved toward the document on the bed. Harold stepped forward and lifted it before her fingers reached the edge. "That's a registered copy," he said. "The original is on file with the county." She pulled her hand back. Her face had gone very still, the specific stillness of someone running through options and finding them fewer than expected. I looked at them both from the hospital bed. Terry's mouth was slightly open. Nicole's was not, but her jaw had a tension in it that I hadn't seen before, something beneath the surface pressing up. I said, "I appraised property for 38 years. I got very good at reading what something is actually worth." Neither of them answered. Terry said finally, in a voice that had lost all its practiced ease, "Dad, what is this?" "That," I said, "is what happens when someone assumes the other person isn't paying attention." The monitor beeped. Nicole looked at Harold. Harold looked at the middle distance with the professional composure of a man who has seen this particular scene before and feels no obligation to make it easier for anyone. Nicole reached for the document again. A second attempt, more deliberate this time. Harold moved it to his briefcase in one fluid motion, snapped the latch, and turned toward the door. "Have a good evening," he said. He left. Nicole stood at the foot of my bed, her handbag still in her hand, the forgotten bag story long since dissolved. The room was quiet except for the monitors. Terry hadn't moved. He was still standing in the same place he'd been when the color left his face, looking at the bed where the document had been a moment ago. I closed my eyes. "You should both get some rest," I said. "I expect the next few weeks will be demanding." I was home from the hospital within 4 days. The recovery was slower than I would have chosen. The body has its own schedule after that kind of surgery, and it doesn't consult you about it. I spent the first week in the armchair in the living room, reading, sleeping in short intervals, and listening to the particular quality of silence in a house where the other occupants are trying to act normal while quietly unraveling. Terry brought me soup the second day. I said thank you. He hovered at the door for a moment, then left. Nicole didn't come to that room at all. I noticed that. The way you notice a chair that's been moved. Not dramatically, just differently. 2 weeks after the surgery, Harold called. "They've retained counsel," he said. "Brian Cole. He filed a petition with Davidson County Chancery Court this morning." I was in the armchair. I set my book down. "What's the ground?" "Incapacity at the time of execution. They're arguing you lack testamentary capacity when you signed the trust, that the proximity to cardiac surgery indicates compromised mental state." I considered that for a moment. It was exactly the move I would have expected from someone with Nicole's research habits and Brian Cole's reputation. Cole had been practicing trust and estate litigation in Nashville for 18 years. He was aggressive, well-reviewed, and had a documented success rate in contested estate cases. Nicole had done her homework. "And the video?" I said. "That's our first response," Harold said. "Patricia's notarization record, the full signing video, and the psychiatric evaluation from 2 weeks prior. I'll also request the cardiologist's operative notes confirming the elective classification." "When does Cole need to respond to those?" "He'll have 10 days after we file. I'd expect a preliminary hearing within the month." I picked up my book again. "Keep me informed." "Of course." A pause. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone who has more important things to do than feel." He made a sound that might have been a laugh, said goodbye, and hung up. The preliminary hearing happened on a Thursday morning, just under a month after the surgery. I attended with Harold. Cole was there with Terry. Nicole was not, which I found interesting. She was the one who had made this decision and retained Cole, but she sent Terry to face the judge while she stayed home. I filed that away. The courtroom in Davidson County Chancery Court was standard. Wood paneling, fluorescent light, the specific bureaucratic gravity of a room where significant things are decided in ordinary surroundings. Cole argued his incapacity theory with the practiced energy of someone who had made similar arguments before, and knew which words worked on which type of judge. Harold responded without theater. He submitted 3 items. The signed psychiatric evaluation dated 2 weeks before execution, documenting Raymond Fletcher as oriented, articulate, and fully competent. The 12-minute signing video, in which I answered each of Patricia's notarial questions clearly and in sequence without hesitation, and the cardiologist's operative notes confirming the procedure was elective, scheduled 6 weeks in advance, with no emergent findings prior to surgery. He also noted calmly that the trust had been registered with Davidson County Register of Deeds the morning after execution, a routine step inconsistent with a document executed in confusion. The judge reviewed the materials. She asked Cole 2 questions. He answered both. Then she denied the petition at the preliminary stage and dismissed without prejudice, meaning Cole could theoretically refile with stronger evidence, but neither Harold nor I expected him to find any. Terry left the courtroom without looking at me. I stood in the hallway afterward while Harold filed our copies. The courthouse windows looked out over a parking structure. I watched a pigeon attempt to land on a concrete ledge, fail, and try again. It succeeded on the 3rd attempt. I appreciated that. Harold came out of the filing room and handed me a copy of the dismissal. Cole will advise them to try a different angle, he said. What angle? Nicole is smarter than to stop here. He was right. The new filing arrived 12 days later, not to the court, but to the Tennessee Real Estate Commission. The complaint, submitted in Nicole's name, alleged that Raymond Fletcher had improperly transferred residential property through a trust instrument without proper disclosure to co-occupants of the property who had established a reasonable expectation of residency rights. The language was careful, too careful. Someone with legal knowledge had written it, or at minimum reviewed it before filing. A week after the complaint was filed, an envelope arrived at Maple Creek Drive. I recognized the commission's return address before I opened it. Inside, a formal notice of complaint and a summons to appear at an administrative hearing. The date was 3 weeks out. I set the envelope on the kitchen table, made myself a cup of coffee, and called Harold. I saw it, he said before I could speak. I've already requested the full file from the commission. Bring everything Nelson gave us, all of it. The Tennessee Real Estate Commission's offices are on Dederick Street, not far from the Capitol. I had been in that building before, years ago, for a license renewal. The lobby has a particular institutional quality. Low ceilings, carpet that has seen better decades, a security desk staffed by someone who checks your ID with the deliberate pace of a person who cannot be hurried. Harold and I arrived 30 minutes early. We sat in a waiting area with bolted chairs and a table with year-old magazines. Harold reviewed his notes. I thought about the Mustang's rear suspension, which I'd been meaning to address before the surgery interrupted the schedule. The hearing room was small, a rectangular table, 6 chairs, a microphone in the center, and 3 commission members seated across from us when we were called in. The chair of the panel introduced herself and the 2 other members. She was measured and professional in the way of someone who had conducted a great many of these and brought no particular investment to any of them. The complaint was read into the record. Harold entered our formal response. Then the chair asked me to address the core allegation: had I transferred residential property without proper disclosure to co-occupants? I said, I transferred my own property, which I own solely and in full, into a trust I established legally, with documentation filed with Davidson County. No co-occupant of my residence has any ownership interest, any tenancy agreement, any legal claim, or any established right to that property under Tennessee statute. The chair nodded and made a note. The questioning continued for 20 minutes. I answered each question directly. Harold supplemented with documentary references when needed. Cole's theory that Terry and Nicole had developed some form of equitable residency claim through 3 years of occupancy required at minimum a written agreement or demonstrated financial contribution to the property's maintenance. They had neither. They had lived in my house without a lease, without paying rent, and without contributing to taxes, insurance, or upkeep in any documented way. Harold had the financial records to demonstrate this. Then Harold requested permission to submit supplemental materials relevant to the complaint's credibility. The chair looked at him for a moment. What kind of supplemental materials? Documents and records that bear on the complaining party's conduct with respect to the property in question, Harold said. She said he could proceed. He submitted 4 items. First, Trevor Nelson's documented record of Nicole's appointment request at the Madison Notary Office, referencing a quitclaim deed transfer of property she did not own. Second, a transcript and audio file of Terry's recorded phone call, year, maybe 2 at the outside, we just have to be patient, with a brief contextual note explaining the circumstances of its recording. Third, bank records showing the $18,400 movement, my initial check for $4,200, Terry's same-week transfer of $14,200 from a joint account, and the subsequent Cayman Islands travel records pulled from public social media. Fourth, the original draft durable power of attorney template found in my own filing cabinet, with my name pre-typed in the principal line and the agent line left blank. The room was quiet while the commission members reviewed the materials. The chair read through the POA draft twice. She set it down. She looked at her colleagues. One of them, the man on the right, leaned back in his chair with an expression that I can only describe as the specific face of someone who has just understood something they did not expect to understand in this room today. The chair said, "Mr. Fletcher, does the complaining party have any written explanation for these documents?" I said, "Not to my knowledge." She made a longer note this time. The deliberation lasted 9 minutes. The chair returned and announced that the commission found the complaint without merit and dismissed it. She also stated that the supplemental materials raised questions warranting referral to the Davidson County District Attorney's Office for review under applicable fraud statutes. That was more than I had expected. I kept my expression level. Harold thanked the panel, gathered his materials, and we walked out into the hallway. The building's fluorescent hum was the same as when we'd arrived. Everything was, except for the particular position of certain dominoes that had just been tipped without being touched. I pushed through the glass door to the outside steps. Standing at the bottom, on the sidewalk with a canvas bag over her shoulder, was Deborah Carr, my neighbor from 4 houses down on Maple Creek Drive. She had lived there 11 years and had the particular gift of being present at interesting moments, without appearing to seek them out. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide in the specific way of someone who has just heard something through a door that was thinner than expected. "Raymond," she said. "Deborah," I said. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I know," I said. "Have a good afternoon." I walked to the parking garage. Harold fell into step beside me. "She'll tell someone," he said. "She'll tell everyone," I said. "That's fine." In Belmead, word travels faster than certified mail. By the following morning, 3 people had called me. A neighbor, a former colleague, a member of my old professional association. I let all 3 go to voicemail. The information was moving now through channels where reputation has weight and visibility. I was making coffee the next morning when my phone rang. The screen read, "Terry." It was the first call from him in over a month. I looked at the name for 2 full rings. Then I set the phone face down on the counter and waited for it to stop. I let Terry's first call go to voicemail. He called again the next morning. I let that one go too. On the 3rd call, late that same afternoon, I picked up. His voice was different. I had expected that. There is a particular register a man drops into when his options have run out, and he knows it, but hasn't yet admitted it to himself. Something between careful and plaintive, softer than his usual tone, as though lowering the volume might to talk, like adults. I was standing at to talk, like adults. I was standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard. The oak at the property line had gone fully into summer, thick and unruly at the crown. I'd planted that tree 27 years ago. "Talk then," I said. "Things have gotten out of hand. I don't think any of us want it to go this way." A pause. "Nicole and we want to work this out." "Work what out?" Another pause. Longer. "The situation." I said, "Terry, after the surgery, did you come back? Did you check on me? Call the nurse's station? Send anything?" Silence. "No," he said finally. "Then there's nothing to work out," I said. "There's a process underway. Let it run." I ended the call and put the phone face down on the counter. He called once more that evening. I didn't answer. Nicole didn't call at all, which told me she had already moved to a different strategy. She was too precise to waste effort on a channel that had closed. She appeared at the front door 4 days later. I was in the garage when I heard the bell, and then the knock when the bell produced no response. I came through the interior door into the kitchen and looked through the side window. She was standing on the front step in a light jacket, holding a small, reusable bag, the kind people carry to farmers' markets, which was almost certainly a calculated choice. She looked less polished than usual. Her hair was down. This was also a calculated choice. I opened the door. "Raymond," she said. Her voice was measured and careful. "Can I come in? I'd like to talk. Just the 2 of us." What did you bring? I said, looking at the bag. I made the focaccia you like. A small, neutral smile. I looked at the bag, then at her. 3 years of gaslighting and property reconnaissance, a quitclaim deed inquiry at a notary office across town, a blank power of attorney with my name already typed on it, and she was standing on my doorstep with focaccia. Nicole, I said, what is it you actually want to say? She dropped the register slightly. We're prepared to move out voluntarily. No more legal action on our side. Cole withdraws everything. We go quietly. She paused. All we're asking is that you sign a simple release, acknowledging there are no financial claims between us going forward. The loan, we'd call it even. The loan. $18,400 that had gone to a Cayman resort while I drove the same truck I'd had for 9 years. The loan, I repeated. We're starting over, she said. We just need a clean break. I looked at her for a moment. She held my gaze. She was good at that. Most people interpret held eye contact as honesty. I've spent enough time in rooms with people who were trying to talk me into bad valuations to know it's a technique. I have an attorney, I said, and you have 30 days. I closed the door. I walked back through the kitchen, picked up my phone, and called Harold. She came to the house, I said. I assumed she would. His voice was unhurried. Did she offer a release on the loan? Yes. We're not signing a release on the loan, he said. We're filing for it. I'll have the petition to Davidson County Chancery Court by end of week. $18,400 plus interest at the statutory rate, which comes to approximately $2,340 plus court costs estimated at $4,100. We can also file the unlawful detainer motion at the same time. They have no written lease, no rent paid, no documented right to occupy. The court will set a 30-day notice. I sat down at the kitchen table. Do it. The court papers were served to Terry and Nicole at Maple Creek Drive 11 days later. I was in the garage when the process server came to the door. I heard Nicole's voice from inside. Not the words, just the tone, which changed after the door opened and again after it closed. Higher on the second change. Clipped. I went back to work on the Mustang's rear quarter panel and let the silence settle. The notice period was 30 days. We were 5 weeks out from the end of summer. I called Harold that evening to confirm the filing was complete. Both actions are filed and served, he said. The unlawful detainer will move quickly. Tennessee courts handle these efficiently when there's no written tenancy agreement. The debt recovery is straightforward. Cole may attempt to negotiate on the loan figure, but there's nothing to negotiate. And the commission referral to the DA? That's out of our hands now. They'll investigate or they won't. Either way, it's on the record. A pause. The next 30 days are theirs to navigate. After that, you have your house back. I thanked him. I poured myself a glass of water. I looked out the kitchen window at the back oak, which was holding its shape against the late afternoon light, the way old trees do. Settled, unimpressed by weather, built for the long duration. 30 days. They left on a Tuesday, 28 days after the court order was served. I knew they were going because I heard it, not the argument I might have expected, not any particular drama, just the sounds of boxes being moved, the friction of furniture legs against hardwood, the particular hollow knock of closet doors opened and closed repeatedly. It went on for most of the day. I stayed in the garage. When I came in at 4 in the afternoon to make coffee, the house had a quality to it I hadn't felt in 3 years, its own silence, undiluted. I walked through the living room, through the kitchen, down the hall to the back bedroom where they'd been staying. The door was open. The room was empty. They'd taken everything. The bed frame, the dresser, the curtain rods, even the light bulb from the ceiling socket. I stood in the doorway for a moment, looked at the bare room, and thought, well, then I went and made my coffee. Harold called the following morning with the court results. The Davidson County Chancery Court had entered judgment on the debt claim. Terry was ordered to pay $18,400 in principal, $2,340 in accrued interest at the Tennessee statutory rate, and $4,100 in court costs. Total, $24,840, to be satisfied within 60 days of judgment. Cole had filed no counter-argument. He had, apparently, advised his clients that no counter-argument existed. And the trust challenge? I said. Cole filed an appeal with the Tennessee Court of Appeals shortly after the Chancery Court dismissal. Harold said. The appellate court reviewed the record and affirmed. I received the ruling this morning. The trust stands. I was quiet for a moment. That's everything, then, I said. Not quite. His voice carried a specific flatness that I had learned to recognize as Harold delivering information he found significant, but was not going to dramatize. The Davidson County District Attorney's Office confirmed receipt of the commission referral. They've opened a preliminary inquiry. I was notified as a courtesy. Whether it proceeds to charges is entirely their determination, but the record is there. I thought about the blank, durable power of attorney with my name typed in the principal line, sitting in a filing cabinet at Harold's office, date stamped and documented. I thought about Nicole at the notary office in Madison, asking about quitclaim deed requirements for a property she had no legal claim to. I thought about Terry on the phone, year, maybe 2 at the outside. Understood, I said. Thank you, Harold. Of course. A pause. The Mustang, how's it coming? Almost done, I said. Engine's running. Interior needs finishing. Good, he said, which from Harold constituted genuine enthusiasm. The day they left, I had gone to the garage and looked at the Mustang. The bodywork was complete. I'd been working on the passenger side door frame the week before the hospital, and finished it during the 30-day notice period, in the evenings when I needed something to do with my hands. The paint was going on in 2 weeks. Original Highland Green, which was the correct choice for a 1968 fastback, and not a subject I was willing to compromise on. The interior was mostly done. New upholstery on the buckets, console refinished, dash resprayed. What remained was the trim detail on the door panels, and a few hours on the steering column. I opened the garage door the morning after Harold's call. The light came in flat and clear, the way it does in late summer, not the soft haze of June, but something sharper, like the air has decided to be precise about things. I stood in the doorway and looked at the car. It looked like itself, which was the entire point. I got the trim tools from the pegboard and sat down on my rolling stool and started on the driver's side door panel. The work was quiet and specific. I had been doing this kind of work for years, the final stages of a restoration where the dramatic problems are solved, and what remains is patience and precision. It suited me. An hour in, I heard the gate at the side of the driveway and looked up. Deborah Carr was walking past with her morning coffee, the way she does when the weather is good. She slowed at the open garage door, looked at the Mustang, and at me. It's beautiful, she said. Getting there, I said. She tilted her head toward the house next door, toward the direction Terry and Nicole had gone. I heard about everything, Raymond. Most of it, anyway. I expect you did. She was quiet for a moment. Then, good for you. She walked on. I went back to the door panel. The judgment against Terry was clear on the court record. $24,840, due within 60 days. Whether he paid it in full, in installments, or through collection proceedings, would be his determination to make. The house was in the trust. The trust would stand. The DA's inquiry would run its course without my involvement. The outcome of that was not mine to control, and I had not built my plan around controlling it. I had built it around what I could document, what I could file, and what I could prove, and that work was complete. I set the trim piece in place and checked the fit. It was right. I reached for the next one. The Mustang would be finished in a few weeks. When the paint was done and the chrome back on and the engine had a few hundred miles on it, I planned to take it out on the highway that runs south toward Franklin. Windows down, no particular destination, the kind of drive you take to hear whether a machine is working the way it should. I was looking forward to it. If you like this story, subscribe to our new channel and listen to a few stories there. You can find the link to it in the collaboration or description of this video, or in the comments. Subscribe so you don't lose us, because this channel may soon cease to exist.